I would like to introduce my newest book, but I will not introduce all of it because you have to buy it and to read it. So, but I'm going to show you the framework, because it's, at the end of the day, it's about a framework, reframing how we look at Palestine. And if you get that, then that's, I think, for me, the most important thing. Let me see if that works. Okay. So, you know, the book is a book in contextual theology. This is very important for you to know. And we say contextual theology. Contextual theology starts with the reality on the ground. It doesn't start in heaven. In that sense, those of you who studied philosophy, it's more like Aristotelian approach, because we look at what is happening in this world and we try to analyze first before we start doing theology. That's very important. And I know that most of you have seen this map. We use it so often, but we really don't think about it too much. So if you look at it, you can see actually how, you know, the blue dots are taking over Palestine slowly but surely. And you have the feeling that Palestine is evaporating with time, because you have more and more Jewish colonies actually being built on Palestinian land. This is the reality. And so I start my book with the first chapter, looking at this reality with the focus on Bethlehem. Why Bethlehem? This is the land, this is the city where I was born. I guess you know another one who was born in Bethlehem, right, some times ago. And it is a city that you in Sweden can relate to, right? Because every year you remember Bethlehem. And so I would like to take you just on a journey to see what is happening in Bethlehem, to my town. So the book is very intellectual, but it's very personal on the same time, because it talks about our daily life. So this used to be the Bethlehem County in 1967. You have the Dead Sea to the east, you have the Green Line to the west, you have Hebron to the south, and Jerusalem, East Jerusalem to the north. Now, first of all, Israel, very early on, after 67, annexed the northern part of Bethlehem and declared it part of Jerusalem. So we lost that part. And then, in the first 40 years of the occupation, Israel built 19 Jewish settlements on Bethlehem land. Now, if you look, where are they built? In the north of Bethlehem and southwest. Why southwest? Because this is the most fertile area in Bethlehem. You know, you have the mountain range going from north to south. Rain comes from the Mediterranean, and so the rain stays on this side of the mountain range. So this is very green area. You have lots of water springs, and this is desert. Then you have these three settlements, like in the middle of nowhere, and you ask yourself, why have they built it there? The answer, because here we have the largest underground water aquifer in the Bethlehem region. So the Israelis are sitting on the water. And then you have Jewish colonies along the Dead Sea, because they control the minerals, they control tourism, etc. But this is not all. So according to the Oslo agreement, this blue area was declared Area C, which means Palestinians have no authority. This is the land now that Israel just last week announced that basically they are annexing it, though de facto they have been doing that all along. And then this area is military zone, which means, we are not allowed even to be there as Palestinians. And then Israel built so-called bypass roads. These are roads that bypass Palestinian towns, but they connect Jewish settlements together. But actually, with these two highways, Israel put boundaries for the expansion of the city of Bethlehem. So we cannot anymore, as Palestinians, build west of this wall. And by the way, most of the land here belongs to Palestinian Christians. This is the Beit Jala area, for those of you who have been there. And we are not allowed anymore to build east of this road. So basically, Bethlehem is confined. And then you can see, if I go back, settlements, they keep expanding like cancer. It is very cancerous, actually, what Israel is doing. And then came the wall. This is the wall that you see when you come to Bethlehem from the north, but there is now a wall to the west, and there is a wall here to the south. So Bethlehem is surrounded from three sides by this 8-meter high wall. More barriers, checkpoints. At that time, this is an older map, there were 29 checkpoints, now 54 checkpoints around the city of Bethlehem. And this is the Israeli colonies that are being built right now. You can see that now Israel is actually building a set of Jewish settlements east of Bethlehem. Now, if you take the 66%, which is Area C, you add to it the 20% so-called nature reserve, 86% of the land of Bethlehem is under, and this is West Bank, remember, this is 86% is either under the control of the Israeli military or of Jewish settlers. So this is the reality that I start with. And I ask myself, how can we describe this reality? So, how best to describe the situation? Now, most of the people use the word conflict, but this is not a conflict. So please don't use the word conflict, because conflict means, there are two groups fighting about something, but this is not the reality. Sometimes I hear in the news as if this were a religious war between Jews and Muslims, but this is not a religious war. The fact that we are, as Palestinian Christians, live there shows that this is not a religious war. And often, in statements, they start as if everything started October 7th, but it didn't start October 7th. And if there is one word I hate, it's the word complicated. When people say it's complicated, it means, we cannot understand it, and it is better if we don't think about it, because we will never be able to grasp it. Have you heard the word complicated in connection with Ukraine? Never, right? It's not complicated. It's crystal clear. And Palestine is even more crystal clear. This is what I'm going to show you. And so what I'm trying to say in the book is that if there is a framework to look at the situation, it is the settler colonial framework. What is happening in Palestine is settler colonialism. Now, not everyone might be familiar with this concept of settler colonialism. This is why let me explain it a bit to you. In fact, very early, this is maybe now more and more people are using it, but Palestinians started using it very early. And it was actually a Palestinian Christian with the name Fayez Sayed, who wrote in 1965 this book called Zionist Colonialism in Palestine. The Sayed family were living in Tiberias until 1948. Actually, they were Protestant Christians. Palestine has lots of great Protestant Christians. Think of, Edward Said, Fayez Sayed, and many others. So he wrote this book. He was the Palestinian representative or the PLO representative at the UN. And he described what's happening in Palestine with two words. He said, Israel is pumping in Jewish settlers and pumping out Palestinians. Very simple. This is what he described. And actually, Fayez Sayed was behind the UN resolution that said Zionism is racism. But actually, the whole idea of settler colonialism after the collapse of the Soviet Union, scholars all over the world started to think about what settler colonialism is. And basically, in my book, I'm bringing this idea from the academia into theology. It doesn't mean that theology is not academia, but I mean from anthropology and political thinking into theology. And I think I was the first one to bring it into theology. So settler colonialism actually is different than conventional colonialism, because settler colonialists, they go to a country with the intention to stay there for good. It's not to go there, occupy a bit, take whatever you can and go back home. No, the intention is to go and to stay there and to replace the indigenous people. So not to live with them, not to share the land with them, but to replace them. This is very important in settler colonialism. And in that sense, the indigenous people, they became aliens at home, and the new settlers, they described as being almost the owner of the land. We do it all the time without noticing. When we say Jews are going back to Palestine, I mean, the parents of Netanyahu have been never in Palestine, right? Never, ever. When you look at him, you know that he's not from there, right? So, and suddenly the Palestinians become like aliens. And by the way, this problem is especially to be seen by theologians and Christians, because most of the Christians, they go to Palestine to see the biblical land, and in the biblical land there is no place for the Palestinians. Look, think about it. You want to run where Jesus walked, I call it, right? In the footsteps of Jesus. And while you are on the footsteps of Jesus, you don't see the real Palestinian people. That's the usual Holy Land trip to Palestine. So Palestinians are almost not there in our thinking. So you can see how even, Christian Zionism is in our heads without even noticing it. This is the danger of it. So, and then, as if the land was empty, that's the whole idea. The land was empty, and we came to make the desert bloom, right? But the land was never empty. It wasn't empty in North America, it wasn't empty in South Africa, it wasn't empty in Australia. It was made empty. That's settler colonialism. And to do that, you have to describe the native people with all, they are savage, they are terrorists, I mean, you name it. So you have to demonize the native people and to portray yourself as bringing civilization and culture and enlightenment. Now, to defend the property that settlers take, they have to create a police state. Without a police state, actually you cannot control the indigenous, because the indigenous people will always actually resist. And just to sum it up, it's all about geography and demography. If you remember this, you will understand what I'm talking about. So the settlers, they would like to take all the geography, the land, and to push all the native demography out of the country. This is what is happening. And if you do that, you have to create an apartheid system. The South African did it very well. North America, they did it their way with reservation. Israel is doing it also their way. So, in that sense, what I'm saying actually is Israel is Europe's last settler colonial project. You know, settler colonialism started in Europe, in the 16th century. Their last project is called Israel. And actually, if you wonder why is the US and many European countries supporting Israel, because they are settler colonial state to start with. And they don't want actually to give up their last baby. That's their last. So if you look, this is the framework I'm trying actually to show. And then what I did in the next part is to say, is this actually a new phenomena in Israel, or was the Zionist project from day one constructed as settler colonial project? And I start actually with 19th century Britain, because Britain was the empire at that time, and to see actually that from day one, from the 19th century, this was actually the intention. The problem, what I try to show in the book, is how theology is embedded in this settler colonial project, Christian theology, not Jewish theology. It started with the Christian theology. And so I start with Lord Shaftesbury, that you see here, who started really this whole idea of colonizing Palestine. And if you look carefully, you can see here 1839, the first time he spoke about it. Now this is a very important year in the history of Palestine, because that year the European countries came to support the Ottomans against Muhammad Ali that came from Egypt. And his idea was to have an Arab state all over Syria, greater Syria. They pushed him out. And they pushed him out because they already started to think of having a European colony in Palestine. And you can see why. Palestine is a fertile country, its location is important, etc. And you can see here how they talk about the land without a people for a people without a land. But you know, British people are very smart sometimes, not always. And so they didn't want to colonize Palestine themselves, but they thought actually they could send European Jews to colonize Palestine as subcontractors of the empire. Now this is very smart of them, because around the turn of the century, you know, Jews in Russia were experiencing lots of pogroms. So they were fleeing Russia and they wanted to go to West Europe. Now the West, England, didn't want to have any of these poor Jews coming to England. They wanted only rich Jews to go Right? It's like Trump, he wants all the rich people, but no poor people as immigrants. So he said, why come to UK? God promised you a land. You don't belong to Europe as Jews. You belong somewhere else. So it was very anti-Semitic, actually, if you think about it. God promised you the land called Palestine. I always like to underline, it wasn't the Lord God that promised the state of Israel the land, it was Lord Balfour. And there is a big difference between the Lord God and the Lord Balfour, thanks God, you know. And actually you can see here, in 1922, how Balfour himself is saying it wasn't only political calcul to send Jews to Palestine, but it was also theological. Here again you can see how all the time theology has been playing a role in the settler colonial project. Because Europeans were doing this kind of theology for 400 years. And, you know, 77 years ago, the Nakba happened when Israel took over 77% of historic Palestine. So that was a major accomplishment for the Zionist movement. 800,000 Palestinians were pushed out. And what happened in 1948, you know, at the Knesset, at the Jewish, before even the Knesset was created, few hours only before that, in May 15th, the Israeli leadership came together and they started thinking what name they should give to this new state. And there were many names they discussed. Herzliya was one of them, after Herzl. Zion was another one. But they decided, and it was actually the last minute, that Ben Gurion said, no, let's call it Israel. And with that name, actually, the problem started. Because many Christians in the pew, like yourself now sitting in the pew, when they start hearing the word Israel in the newspaper, and they go on Sunday to church, and it talks about Israel, they immediately, without thinking about it, connected biblical Israel with the modern state of Israel, creating for us this whole idea that we are fighting. Now, the third phase was actually in 1967 when Israel took over the West Bank, Gaza, the Golan Heights, and again, theology played a major role. For example, Israel called this war the Six-Day War. It's a biblical name, again. We never use the word Six-Day War. It's the 1967 war. Why Six-Day War? Because God created, according to the Bible, the world in 6 days, and in the seventh day he rested, right? So Israel thought, now we got all over Palestine, now we can rest. The problem, they did not rest, and they did not let us rest. But then, this year, 1967, was important in the history of the region because in the Arab world, the Pan-Arabism was defeated with Nasser. And people thought Islam is the solution. So we started seeing, you know, Islamist movement started to grow. The same thing happened in Israel, actually, because all of these Jewish settlers thought, now we have the West Bank, this is the biblical land, we will now build more settlements in the West Bank. And Christian, also Zionism, started mushrooming, because especially in the US, 1967, 1968, this is when America lost the war in Vietnam. And these right-wing Christians in the US thought America lost the war in Vietnam because they are not anymore following God's way. But Israel won the war because Israel is God's way. And so you have this whole idea of Christian Zionism actually now, and here I hope I'm not you think these are crazy Christians that are Christian Zionists, these evangelicals. More dangerous than these crazy evangelicals, if I say crazy, are the liberal Christians, the liberal Christian Zionists. And here I'm having a quote from Paul van Buren, the most liberal theologian you can think of. And I would like to read just for you to give you an idea. I mean, this is not evangelical. He wrote, the role of the Christian church is to extend the revelation of God of Israel to the nations. Christianity should do this not only by preaching this gospel to the nations, but also by rendering service to the people of Israel. This service takes an external and internal form. Externally, the Christian church must become the extension of the Anti-Defamation League, combating all anti-Semitism among Gentiles. It also takes the form of defense of the state of Israel, both raising money for Israel defense and defending the state of Israel against all anti-Zionist calumny. All criticism of the state of Israel, whether based on alleged injustice to the Palestinians or claims that Israel is unjust to third world people, are simply lies. It is the job of the Christian church to combat all these lies against Israel, being taught the truth by Jews, that is the government of the state of Israel. What more do you need? Right? I mean, this is an agent for the Israeli state. This is not a theologian. Now, I put there Bishop Crystal Stander. I know he's a saint in the Swedish church. He did great things, but actually, if you look at his writing, he belongs to this liberal Christian Zionism. We never thought about it. Maybe this is the first time you hear about it. But there is so much subtle Christian Zionism in theology that we don't even think about it. So this is maybe somebody to work on for his PhD. If we have here PhD students, this is a good... And then, during Oslo and after Oslo, while they were negotiating a peace treaty, Israel took over and built more settlements than before. And this is nothing new. If you think of North America, while the white Europeans were negotiating with the Native Americans, they took all the west of the USA. So nothing new in that sense. And for me, Gaza is just sealing this project. In Gaza, Israel thought this is the moment where we can seal, we can close this deal. Settler colonialism will be completed by pushing the people out. And this is the first sentence in the coalition between Netanyahu and this current government. We read, these are the basic lines of the national government headed by me. The Jewish people have an exclusive and unquestionable right to all areas of the land of Israel. When you hear the land of Israel, you have to replace it with historic Palestine. So as a Christian, I have no right whatsoever to be in that land. Only as a stranger, as long as I behave, I can live there. If I don't behave, they can kick me out. And they continue, the government will promote and develop colonies in all parts, again, of historic Palestine, in the Galilee, because there is still a big Palestinian presence, in the Negev, the Golan Heights, which doesn't belong to Israel, and in the West Bank. And when it says Judea, that means so Israel is not anymore hiding their settler colonial project. They are proud about it. So, again, to do this, you have to create a system of apartheid. I will quit this, and the ICJ is saying this is plausible genocide, what is happening in Betlehem, which, by the way, is not the only genocide. It's the only genocide in the 21st century, but there were 10 other genocides in the 20th century by European countries in Africa and other places. Again, Israel here is in good company. So, and I come to the second, the last part actually. How can Israel do this in the 21st century? I mean, I understand Europeans did it in the 16th century. There was no human rights, no international law. But in the 21st century, how do you do it? Because this settler colonial project is enabled by the West. They give Israel all the hardware, these are all the toys, the F-35 jets and the submarines from Germany and you name it. And Christian seminaries provide the software. The software is more dangerous than the hardware. Because as I said, it's in our heads somehow that Israel belongs there, not in Europe. That's the settler colonial idea, actually. So what I tried in the book, actually, is to redefine what Christian Zionism is. Before, people thought Christian Zionism is, these crazy evangelical Christians. And they think about the end time, all these crazy ideas. But actually, to understand the dangers of Christian Zionism, we have really to understand what it is. And so what I did is really to redefine what Christian Zionism is. And I defined it as a Christian lobby that supports the Jewish settler colonialism of Palestinian land using scriptural construct within a meta-narrative while taking global consideration into account. It sounds very complicated, right? Again, I told you I don't like the word complicated. So it's really not complicated, but to understand that settler colonialism, that Christian Zionism is a Christian lobby. This is really what it is. And you have it here in Sweden, right? So just to understand what I mean with that, first, the definition is less focused on the biblical discourse. I'm not interested in this verse in the Bible and that verse in the Bible. I live that with evangelicals, they do it well, I don't need to deal with it. Because Christian Zionism is not about the crazy evangelicals. It's all over. I mean, think about it. When President Biden says, I am a Zionist, he's not evangelical, he's not Protestant, he is Catholic, he's not that religious, but he's a Christian Zionist. It's a different brand of Christian Zionism. But we overlooked that, and that was our mistake. So the emphasis in this new definition is on the lobby aspect. This is a lobby group, and this group still lobby bishops in this country, they lobby government in this country, they do lobby work daily. I remember when I received the Olaf Palme Award, I think it was then, that they had one full page in the newspaper here against me, not by an Israeli, she was a Lutheran pastor. She is part of that lobby for Israel, and attack everyone that criticizes Israel. So, we have to understand that when we talk about Christian Zionism, there is something bigger. So people who are engaged in Christian Zionism, they don't believe they are fighting just for Israel, they are fighting for something bigger. If they are evangelicals, they are fighting for God. If they are Germans, they are, the meta-narrative is the Holocaust, and so on. I wonder what is the meta-narrative in Sweden. This is something in 2 weeks you are going to think about in Denmark. But this whole idea of Christian Zionism is always connected to some local consideration. It could be local, it could be global. For example, a question, is Christian Zionism today in Sweden maybe somehow affected by Muslim immigration to Sweden? This could be, for example, the local consideration here in today's Christian Zionism in Sweden. So we have to think about those things. Then you can see the web. It's not just, a biblical idea. This is much, much more dangerous. So, and if you meet really a Christian Zionist, you cannot discuss with him, because it's not about head knowledge. It's developed to heart knowledge. It's something very emotional for them. It's not something that you can discuss rationally. It's irrational. And this is again the danger of it. So basically, I'm saying it's not the biblical hermeneutic. Because, most of the Palestinian theologians, before this book, they were saying, these Christian Zionists misunderstood this verse. But we have the right understanding of the verse. This is nonsense. It doesn't affect Christian Zionism. We need to understand really what Christian Zionism is. And this is what I try to do here. Now, sorry, I'm trying just to be quick now. If you look for the blueprint for Christian Zionism, unfortunately you find it in the Bible. One of the young promising theologians from Finland, Pekka Pitkänen, actually looked at the so-called Deuteronomistic history in the Bible. That's from the book of Deuteronomy to 2 Kings. Unfortunately, he died very young, this theologian. And he said, all ideas of settler colonialism you can find there. Now, and I think this is our problem in liberation theology. Because liberation theologians, they were talking all the time about the Exodus. But they never thought about the second part of the story, which is the genocide in Canaan. Right? Joshua going and ethnically cleanse, the people in Canaan. So we have to think of this seriously. This is what I called in the book the Joshua factor. All political leaders in Israel saw themselves as Joshua. Very interesting. So I have here a picture, Ben Gurion. You see, here is Ben Gurion. In 1958, when Israel celebrated its 10th anniversary, Ben Gurion invited people, believe it or not, for a Bible study. Wow. Whom did he invite? He invited few rabbis. He invited all the military generals. He invited the politicians like Dayan and others. And he invited biblical archaeologists, including Christian biblical archaeologists. And, you know, in biblical studies always, if we do Bible study, what book should we read? Guess which book they took? Joshua. And the whole deliberation during all of these evenings of doing Bible studies, they were discussing what is more important, to occupy the land, to conquest the land, or to build settlements. These are the two sections of the book of Joshua. The first section is actually conquest, the second section is settlement. And so this whole debate was actually about what's happening in Gaza today. Should we conquer or should we build settlement? And it's not only him, Moshe Dayan, who was the war minister of Israel in 1967, in his book, Living with the Bible, he thought of himself being Joshua. He said, no, Ben Gurion was not Joshua. Ben Gurion was Moses. I'm Joshua, because I'm the one who conquering the West Bank, took over the West Bank. I'm the one who's building settlement, so I am Joshua. And all the way to Netanyahu. You remember Netanyahu on the 27th of October, just 20 days after October 7th, when he, in the press conference, when he announced that Israeli soldiers are going into Gaza, he said, "You must remember what Amalek has done to you, says our Holy Bible." And he was referring to 1 Samuel 15:3, where God is saying, "Now go and smite Amalek, and utterly destroy all that they have, and spare them not, but slay both man and woman, infant and suckling, ox and sheep, camel and ass." And this is exactly what Israel is doing in Gaza today. But God is ordering that. This is the 21st century. 16th century, maybe I could say people were not that sophisticated. But in the 21st century, so, to end, is the Bible a tool of colonization or liberation? You know, actually, the Bible is, and the Quran or whatever biblical text, I like to look at them like the bazaar in the old city of Jerusalem. You can find there everything. So, if you are looking for text of settler colonization, you know, you have it in Joshua. Read the book of Joshua and you think, wow. Now, if you are interested in justice, you go to the prophets in the Old Testament or you go to Jesus. So, what you find in the Bible says not so much about the Bible, but it says about you. Because you find in the Bible a mirror of you. If you want text that supports settler colonialism, then you are part of the settler colonialism. But if you are serious about justice, there are enough texts in the Bible that talks about justice. So it doesn't matter if you are a Jew or a Christian, you will find there what you are looking for. So let's together decolonize Eurocentric theologies, dismantle all settler colonial structures, and work towards a land that is shared equally, a society that is inclusive in nature, and where faith is a source of liberation and innovation. And I tell you, this is the urgent call for a theology after Gaza. Thank you very much.
This is Andreas Holmberg. Let me just make a very short introduction. In 2019, you defined a thesis, a doctoral thesis, with the title, "The Church in the New Landscape." There you are reflecting over how the Swedish church congregations are enacting multicultural and multi-religious environments. And then you were elected bishop in 2019. And you are one of the bishops that have taken a role in the current debate about the situation in Gaza. And we are very grateful that you have been speaking out against what's happening in Gaza. So I would like to start thanking you for an ethical leadership in times of political and moral destructions in the world. Most welcome, Andreas.
Thank you.
And there is Erik Lusén, Director for ACT Church of Sweden. But now you're also moderator for ACT Alliance, aren't you?
I used to be.
Used to be.
I stepped down at the General Assembly in Indonesia in October last year.
Yeah. But one of your voices here in the public in Sweden has been to promote a continuation to support UNRWA. You have criticized that Sweden defunds UNRWA. It's a terrible blow, quoting you. And we are glad that ACT Church of Sweden calls on the Swedish government to resume core funding to UNRWA. So I will invite you both to come forward and give some reflections on the lecture we just heard. Please start with Andreas.
Okay, thank you. Well, dear Mitri, thank you for a very important book. I have both the English and the Swedish copy. And I really encourage you to read it, those of you who bought it last night. If you get your hands on it in the future, do read it. I think you have achieved a lot. It's not a very thick book, but you've achieved a lot. And there are some major important contributions in the book, and I think you've laid out a number of them in your presentation just now. And you cover a lot of ground in the book. You speak about settler colonialism, about the concept of chosenness, the chosen people, the chosen land. You speak about the use of the Bible, or the abuse of the Bible to legitimize colonialism, and so forth, and many other things. And I think the title in itself, Decolonizing Palestine, is very important. And as I read your book, I was challenged myself. I realized that I need to decolonize my mind. I need to decolonize my way of thinking. Because as you laid out briefly here in your presentation, we are marinated, we are born, we are raised into ways of thinking about Palestine, about Israel, and we're mixed in biblical narratives with history. You speak about that in the book. And we also have this sort of romanticized view of the Holy Land. And there's one passage in your book where you tell a story about when you walk in Jerusalem with I think it's an American theologian, and you see the actual Jerusalem, the Jerusalem of today, the beauty and the struggles, while he only sees the biblical Jerusalem. This is where Jesus walked, this is where Golgotha was, and so forth. So I realized I need to be decolonized. And I think one of the really important key takeaways for myself is what you just showed about the liberal Christian Zionism. I very much have the impression of the assumption that it's only Christian Zionism is a thing about the fundamentalists, the really way out right-wing extremist Christians, but it's us, it's among us. And this citation you read out from Van Buren, I mean, that was just terrible. That was terrible. And you challenged also, well, I wouldn't say he's a saint, but Christian Stenberg is an important figure. So that would be interesting maybe to speak to you more about. And I think we are summoned by your book not to read less of the Bible, but to read more of the Bible. We are summoned to go deeper, not, like you said, you can find anything in the Bible, but because that's the case, we need to read the Bible even more so that we can do away with the biased Bible reading, so that we can read Jesus rather than Joshua. Because after all, in our Protestant and most certainly in our evangelical Lutheran tradition, we think there are more important texts. There's a core and there's a periphery, centrum or periphery in the Bible. Luther says that. And the core is, of course, Jesus. And I think that speaks also about the concept of chosenness that you address in one of the chapters. You say there's the chosenness in the sense that we are chosen to govern this land, to conquer it. That's in the speaking of Joshua, of Netanyahu, and many others. But Jesus has a completely different aspect of chosenness. He says God has chosen the poor, the desolate, the desperate, the people on the margins. Those are the chosen people. So I think we need to reclaim the true Christian, Jesus meaning of what it means to be chosen, and not allow ourselves to be compromised by the Joshua way of thinking. So I think that's an important part of the book, where you lay out the two basic differences of chosenness. And yet there's so much I think I'll give Eric the chance to say something. But I think you also reclaim the word Palestine and Palestinians. You go way back, the concept of the land, you speak of the land rather than the state. More than 2,500 years, Palestine. It's always been a region of multitude, of diversity. Many peoples have fought over this area of this land. And so Palestine is not a unified concept. It is not a singular people. Palestinians are rich, they have a diversity. There's a multitude of languages, ethnicities, and religious adherences. And I think because there's a strong, I get these letters by the embassy from, what's his name now, Ramzi Kuri. And I think the state of Israel really wants us to think that Palestine and Palestinians is only inhabited by Muslims, vile Muslims. It's not. Palestinians are and have always been a diverse people. So let's not buy into that narrative.
Perhaps just to echo what the bishop said, I think this is a very important book for all of us to study. And at the end of it, we're proposing study circles in the congregations and at the dioceses, and I think that's crucial because there are so many interesting thoughts that you lay out in this book, Mitri, and I think it's, as you said, we need to decolonize our minds, and I think the very first remark, it's about contextual theology, it's about the reality on the ground, and given the fact that we have had this long-standing relationship to the Palestinian Lutheran Church, to our Palestinian partners, this reality lives with us also here in Sweden. And that's why it's so devastating to witness what is happening now, and I especially like the addition of the 4th chapter, Theology After Gaza, because I think that speaks, as you said, not only to the situation in Israel and Palestine, it speaks to the whole world.
Yes.
What are the right conclusions from what is happening in Gaza right now? Tom Fletcher, he's the Under Secretary General for Humanitarian Affairs and Emergency Relief Coordinator. He spoke to the Security Council on May 13, and I urge you all to read his statement. It's also devastating, because all the humanitarian aid organizations are now very, very specific that this must stop, and you must take action. And they can talk, and they are witnesses, because it's impossible for Palestinian journalists, Palestinian civil society to report on what's going on, even though individuals do that. But it's like an impossible situation for all of them. But still, the humanitarian aid workers are there. And everyone agrees now. the Red Cross, Save the Children, Church of Sweden, all of us, that we need to see actions and not only statements,
Exactly.
as Rula said in her initial remarks. And perhaps that is happening slowly but slowly. Because I think what we have seen here in Sweden is that the Swedish government over the past 3 years, we've been expecting action from them because we have a proud history in Sweden when it comes to this situation in Israel-Palestine. This situation, I'll talk about the situation of the conflict. But we have seen a change of policy, which is very, I would say even dramatic, because we have a new strategy for Palestine, where the word occupation no longer is there. It's not seen as the major stumbling block for a just peace in Israel and Palestine. But now, recently, we see statements made by the Minister for Development Cooperation, Busa, that they will consider the proposal from the Netherlands whether we should freeze the association agreement that Israel has with the EU. So perhaps we will soon see actions. We also see the call from liberal politicians in Sweden saying that we need to sanction also some of the ministers, Smotrich and Ben-Gvir. This has been impossible to talk about in the Swedish political context for the past 3-4 years, but now slowly but slowly perhaps we will see some action also on the part of the ruling government coalition in Sweden. And I mean, given what is happening, that's not much, but it's still some signs of hope.